Hello, my friends. I hope you're having an amazing day today. Welcome back to another episode of our ProRevenge series, where many of you come to get your daily dose of satisfaction by listening to stories of others getting what they deserve. In this episode, we have 5 stories. The first story features someone getting back at their roommate for fraud, and the second is a long, satisfying tale of someone taking down a horrible manager. I hope you stay for these stories and be sure to hit that subscribe button for future revenge stories. This first story is titled, Roommate Thought She Was Sneaky, Ended Up Owing Me $400 and Got Suspended. This happened during my second semester dorming at my college campus. I met my roommate at orientation and could already tell she was going to be a pain, and I was right about that. I had planned to move rooms to be closer to some friends the next semester, but let me get to the story that led to my revenge. On campus, you paid for meals using your student ID, which had a certain amount of money loaded onto it each semester. You could also use an app where you entered your name and ID information to make payments easier, but the name and ID had to match for it to work, which will be important later. Any funds from the fall semester would roll over into the spring, but at the end of spring they would expire. Because of this, and because I only ate once or twice a day, I had a ton of money saved up on my card. My roommate, on the other hand, did not. I offered to pay for some of her meals from time to time in exchange for her picking up the food for me. This involved her using my card in person, and she'd return it afterward. Then, one day, I noticed on my app that my card was being charged even when I wasn't ordering food. And these weren't charges for a single meal. They were for meals for several people. This meant someone either stole my ID card or was impersonating my info on the app, both of which are major violations on my campus. I quickly put 2 and 2 together and was pretty upset. Initially, I was going to confront her, but I decided to formulate a plan instead. I ordered a second ID card for $25 to use later. I let her continue charging things to my card over 2 weeks for her and her friends. She wasn't very good at hiding it, as they'd come back to our dorm to eat. I sat there, took screenshots, and sent emails to the app's support team about the charges, knowing nothing would happen until I contacted someone in person. One day, it got even better. You could buy groceries off campus with the card, and she decided to pay for alcohol with my card. This didn't flag as an issue since I was over 21, but she was only 19. I'm not sure how she got the alcohol, but it was the perfect opportunity to act on my plan. I put on my best sad face and contacted the head of campus living and the head of my dorm about the charges on my account. I dropped hints that it could be my roommate, and mentioned that I'd gotten a new ID, asking what I should do. They told me to order a new card, deactivate my current ID once I received it, and use the new one for purchases. This would leave my old ID with a balance of $0 and trigger an alert if someone tried to use it. They also said they'd visit my dorm to discuss the issue with my roommate. I accepted and waited. They sent a confirmation email about the visit, and I decided to add more fuel to the fire. My roommate was complaining about not having funds for food in front of me in our dorm. I told her I couldn't help her as I was running low on funds too, and she laughed it off and left the room, probably to use my old ID. I deactivated my card right after she left. Surprise, surprise, she tried to use my info to pay for her and her friends, but it was declined, and it triggered an alert that my ID was used. Campus security was called, and she was escorted back to our dorm, perfectly timed for our meeting with campus living. She was terrified when they came to talk with her and searched her stuff. On her phone, still logged into the app, was my ID information and name. Her dorm closet had half a bottle of cheap vodka, and on my phone was a screenshot of the unauthorized vodka purchase. In the end, she was forced to pay me back all the funds she used in cash, and was reported for underage drinking, which automatically suspends you from campus living for at least a year and goes on your record as identity theft. I got to have my own dorm for the remainder of that semester and part of the next one. Her parents, who were incredibly embarrassed and apologized profusely, paid me back the $400. When she eventually returned to campus, nobody wanted to dorm with her because they knew she had stolen her previous roommate's ID. I think she ended up renting off campus. That was some textbook revenge. A perfect example of giving someone an inch and they take a mile. Buying food for yourself on someone's dime without them knowing is bad enough, but using someone's card to treat yourself and your friends to food? That leaves me speechless. I keep telling myself she was buying food for less fortunate people to avoid losing my mind over this. This story is titled, Fire Me Before I Quit? I Ruin Your Life. Since I'm still in school, I took a job at a bakery chain which I won't name, but it has bread in the title and sells overpriced salads and sandwiches. I worked there for close to a year where I had a boss named Betty, not her real name, of course. Betty and I didn't get along at all. She had forced the previous general manager to quit by having an affair with him and threatening to tell his wife if he didn't leave his job. He quickly quit, and she was promoted to general manager. I didn't like her, but I had to respect her dedication to becoming general manager of a small store. When I first started working there, I was respectful, but she did things that got on my nerves. For example, I'd clean and mop all the areas I was told to, and once I was done and took a 5-minute break, she'd rush out of the manager's office yelling, "Why aren't you working?" She'd glare at me and sometimes accidentally drop an entire pot of brewed coffee onto my freshly mopped floor for me to clean. I quickly learned to always look busy. Once she realized I wasn't going to grovel at her feet, she started cutting my hours. The store ran on a Game of Thrones-style politics for promotions and raises, and somehow, all her friends became managers and bullied the rest of us. She was barely at work. She'd drive to the job just to clock in case corporate checked her hours, essentially stealing hours. When you clocked in, it printed a small slip of paper showing the time. She'd drop these on the floor for me to clean up. I'd usually pick them up and stick them in my pocket, which led to me finding Betty's clock-in and clock-out stubs at my house, and this will be important later. Did I mention she was blatantly prejudiced? One day at work she walked out and said, "When you're on the clock, I own you." We were all people of color and she wasn't. When we reacted, she backpedaled, saying, "I didn't mean it like that. This will also be important later." After a while I got tired of begging for hours, so I got a second job. I wanted to reduce my hours, which were already barely 1 day a week, but suddenly, when I got my new job, she scheduled me for every single day of an entire week. She never did that, even when we were on semi-good terms. I told her I had a new job and couldn't handle that schedule. After that, I went home and called my friend who still worked there to say I was going to quit the next day. He has a bad habit of putting his phone on speaker while cleaning at work, so Betty overheard. The next day, I went through the respectful motions of saying, "Thank you for the opportunity," and so on. Betty let me finish my entire speech before saying, "Oh yeah, I was meaning to tell you, you're fired." I was so blindsided and upset that I gave her a piece of my mind and left. I was mad about being fired before I could quit, but didn't press the issue. I'm only 18 and already had another job, and I wasn't expecting Betty to give me a good reference anyway. I would have left it alone if the district manager hadn't texted me thinking I was still working there. I explained that I was fired, and he was stunned since I was a decent employee. He asked why she let me go, and I told him everything, including that she fired me before I could quit. He was furious and asked if she'd done anything else. I vented about her prejudiced remarks, and he asked if anyone could corroborate my story. I forgot to mention that she slowly fired or forced people to quit and replaced them with her friends and family, which violated company policy due to conflicts of interest. I asked everyone working that day if they could vouch for what I said, and one coworker, Andy, did even better. Andy is convinced he's the next big vlogger, so he's always recording on his phone, either video or audio, for hours, hoping to catch a funny clip. His content is pretty awkward, but he labels each recording by date and time. When he checked, he found audio of Betty making prejudiced remarks. I got a brilliant idea, and with my other co-workers, we scoured Andy's recordings. We found great moments of Betty saying controversial things or being outright nasty, but this wasn't enough for me. I try to avoid conflict, but when I'm in a situation, I follow through. I looked her up on Facebook and discovered she was married. Nobody knew this. When she had the affair with the previous manager, Mark, and blackmailed him, she was also cheating on her husband. I don't think anyone cared enough to find out because she was so unpleasant. I found Mark's Facebook and learned that he and his wife had separated. It turns out that even after he quit, Betty was still trying to extort money from him. When he didn't pay, she told his wife anyway, causing their divorce and forcing him to move back in with his parents. I researched and found that in my state, blackmail or extortion is a third-degree felony, carrying a maximum of 7 years in prison and a fine of over $10,000 to the victim. I told Mark my plan for Betty, and he agreed to call the police but said he'd wait a week until I finished my part. I met with the district manager, Ben, and showed him all the evidence, the recordings, written statements from my former co-workers, and the clock-in-out slips showing Betty clocked in, left, and returned 8 to 10 hours later. Ben thanked me for the information, and I left. A few days later, while walking past the store, I noticed it was closed in the middle of the day. I texted a co-worker who still worked there, and he told me everything. Ben checked the security cameras and confirmed Betty wasn't there for the full time she claimed. He then investigated the store's expenses, suspecting she was stealing more than just hours. He found she was misappropriating money meant for repairs and other expenses for personal use, and was breaking numerous health and safety codes. She was fired immediately, along with her cronies, leaving no one to run the store. They shut it down to clean up and fix everything she neglected. Meanwhile, Mark told Betty's husband, with photo proof, that she had cheated, phrasing it to suggest she was still cheating. Her husband flipped out and decided to divorce her. Betty, who posted everything on Facebook, was begging for a place to stay, but her friends and family abandoned her, leaving her living in her car while jobless. Then, Mark sued her for extortion. She scrambled to find a lawyer, and to make matters worse, the company sued her for the stolen money, repair costs, and lost revenue while the store was closed. Betty's life fell apart. She had to sell her car for far less than it's worth to cover legal fees. Mark told me she was crying in the courtroom, but I wasn't super close with him, so I didn't get many details. The last I heard, Betty was living with her sister, who definitely dislikes her. To think she could have avoided all this if she just let me quit. Betty sounds like a terrible person to work for, abusing her position in every way. Thank goodness for Andy's vlogger ambitions. Those recordings really helped the case. I wonder if this was a Panera Bread. This story is titled Height Approved. This isn't my story but my parents'. It was probably the first time I witnessed malicious compliance, and I still remember it well. It was about 25 years ago, so I was about 8, and we had just moved into a 150-year-old house that was in need of some major repairs. My dad, thinking ahead, knew he would need a large garage and workshop to really get started on the renovations properly. On the edge of our yard was an ancient barn that was falling apart and needed to be torn down. My dad figured that this was the best place to build his new workshop, so that was his plan. We had met and were on good terms with all the neighbors at that point. When the plans for the new workshop were finished, my parents went around to all the neighbors as a courtesy to show them the plans and get their blessings. The neighbors beside us, whose property the new workshop would border, I'll call them the Peters, were concerned about the height. The existing barn was 16 feet high, and they asked if we could only build it one story, 12 feet max, so as not to block the sun in their yard. Sure, no problem, my parents agreed. They wanted to go 2 stories for extra storage, but 1 story wasn't a deal breaker, so the old barn was torn down and the foundation was laid for the new one. During that time, there was a falling out with the Peters and my parents. I'm not quite sure what happened, but it turned nasty. One day my brother and I were playing street hockey, and Mr. Peters came out yelling at us. He said, "Get off the road, you half-breeds. You have to earn your place in this town." I want to note that my dad's black, so we're both half-black. Upon hearing this, my mom had to physically restrain my dad from going over and giving him a serious beating. Eventually, my dad cooled off and started on his plan. The plans for the 1-story workshop went out the window. Soon, the new garage that was supposed to be only 1 story gained a 2nd story in the blueprints. If they were going to direct racist comments at his kids, my dad would build what he wanted. As construction started, the Peters came over to ask why a 2-story structure was being built and were told to go kick rocks. We didn't hear from them again until the roof started to go on. The bylaws of the township limited all outbuildings to 24 feet high. The Peters called the township and a building inspector, claiming that the new garage was well over 24 feet high. If it was over that height, the entire thing would have to be torn down and rebuilt, costing us tens of thousands of dollars. I remember the Peters standing there, watching the inspector with smug looks on their faces. 2 days later, we got the final report back from the township inspector, 23 feet, 11 inches, just as my dad had drawn up in his new plans. He sent me up on the roof of the garage, which was just plywood with no shingles yet, with some spray paint, and had me write 23 feet 11 inches height approved in 2-foot-high orange neon letters across the entire roof facing their yard. Not only did the garage block all the sunlight from reaching their yard, but my dad waited until everything was done around the house before he shingled that side of the roof. They had to stare at those neon orange letters for almost 3 years. What a great pro-revenge. Those orange letters staring them in the face every day were the ultimate slap to those racist neighbors. This next story is titled, I Need That Elevator Now. I'm an elevator technician. When they break, I'm the one who fixes them. When parts wear out, I replace them. You get it. The other day, I was on a job replacing a worn-out emergency light. I need to note that this is a 3-stop elevator, a ground floor, 1st floor, and 2nd floor. I started by hanging up all of my out-of-order signs and began working on the ground floor. 5 minutes in, I had just disassembled the old piece, and this is where the story begins. In comes an entitled woman, a Karen in her mid-40s who can walk perfectly fine, carrying one barely filled grocery bag. She was walking with her daughter, who's around 15 years old. She said, "Excuse me, is the elevator broken again?" I replied, "Not exactly, ma'am. I'm changing this," showing her the new emergency light, because the old one wasn't working anymore. "This will probably take about an hour to complete." She responded, "How am I supposed to get my groceries upstairs?" Getting a little annoyed, I looked at her bag and gave her the "Are you kidding me" look. The daughter chimed in and said, "Mom, seriously, take the stairs, it's 2 floors." "No, I pay for this elevator and I need it now," the woman insisted. The daughter sighed and said, "I'm going up," and took the stairs. The woman then asked me how long it was going to take, and I said, "Like I said, ma'am, about an hour." The woman then sat down on a bench in the hallway, waiting for me to finish. "Really?" "Oh well, I did my thing in the cabin. No rush at all. Mounted the new emergency light to the ceiling, and packed my things to go 1 floor up to start the wiring on top of the cabin." The entitled woman asked me if I was done yet, and I responded, "No, ma'am, I still have to wire things up on top of the elevator." She told me she could see that I was done and that I was packing up my things. I told her, yes, I have to take my bag 1 floor up so I can start the wiring on the ceiling. I told her not to use the elevator, that there were exposed wires up there, and she might cause the elevator to get stuck if she tried. I told her it wasn't safe. She sat back down on the bench, seriously ticked off. I took my bag and made my way upstairs. As soon as I stood in front of the 1st floor door, I heard the door on the ground floor close, and sure enough, the entitled woman went into the elevator and tried to take it upstairs. Oh, heck no, I wasn't having that. I took my emergency key, and as soon as the elevator started moving, I opened the lock, and the elevator came to a sudden stop. This, of course, terrified her, and she screamed. I opened the door and, in my most fake surprised voice, yelled, "Oh no, what have you done?" while calmly pressing the emergency stop on the elevator. Yep, this thing wasn't going anywhere soon. I said to her, "This is exactly why I said the elevator is unsafe to use. Now, I'll do my best to get it working again as soon as possible, but you made a mess up here, so I don't know how long it's going to take." I need to note that there was no mess, but I couldn't resist teaching her a little lesson. The entitled woman started to swear, yell, and make a scene. I told her, "I'll be right back. I have to go to the engine room to see if I can get it working again." I closed the door and made my way up to the 2nd floor. The daughter came out of the apartment because of her mother's yelling. I quickly explained what happened, and the daughter, raising her voice, said, "Oh no, please get her out of there." But then she came closer and whispered to me, "Don't hurry, make her suffer, music to my ears." I smiled, gave her a thumbs up, and made my way to the engine room. I called my supervisor to explain the situation in case she filed a complaint. In the engine room, I started playing around with the fuses, putting her in the dark because, I hadn't connected the emergency light yet. I played with her for about half an hour before I turned off the emergency stop I had activated. The elevator synchronized to the lowest floor, and I waited for the doors to open. I said to her, "Please don't ever do that again. You could have been trapped in there for hours." The entitled woman, who was as white as a sheet and shaking, said, "No, and took the stairs and went inside. I never heard from her again. I calmly finished my job and left the building with a smile on my face. Mission accomplished. I want to make it clear that there was never any risk of anybody getting hurt. Some people have concerns about safety. I made sure there was never any risk. It was intentional that the elevator was able to move because I needed it to, otherwise I wouldn't be able to access the car top because of the distance between the floors. I tested all the safeties I was going to need before I started the work. There were never exposed live wires that could have put her in harm's way, and the only people I saw during that entire time were the 2 mentioned in the story. It's funny how even the daughter was embarrassed and wanted her mom to suffer in that situation. The smart kid probably recognized that her mom was an entitled Karen who threw too many unnecessary fits and wanted to teach her a lesson. This story is titled, "Enjoy Losing 2 Jobs." I used to be a consultant for a large technology company. My role was essentially to go in and manage the operations of a project or program to ensure it was running smoothly. This particular job was at a large international bank, and tensions were high as the project was failing. We had this program manager who was also my direct manager. Let's call him Nabby. Nabby consistently talked to and treated people terribly, told people to sort their life out and to stop failing at tasks, and so on. Some examples of his behavior include 1. firing contractors while they were on holiday. 2. Purposely blacklisting people he had personal issues with, even though their performance was fine. 3. Telling me not to hire or interview any African people because they were quote-unquote lazy. 4. Making people work until 2 in the morning multiple times a week and then belittling them for not being in at 6 in the morning. I did my best as the operations manager to try to stop this from happening or make life a bit easier for the people, but it wasn't working. So I decided to build up a business conduct case in the background. While this was going on, it got so bad that I submitted the case to legal. Then one day, it was my turn. Nabi decided to fire me in the most spectacular way in front of the clients and the other staff because he couldn't handle me going against him anymore. Except I had submitted a case against him, which protected me against retaliation. So, I kept my seat next to him while the investigation continued. He was eventually sacked for everything he did and the legal exposure he caused. Fast forward 2 years. I was at another large consultancy, and part of my role was to keep an eye on who was being hired. I saw Nabi's name come up on the reports of incoming hires due to start within the next few days. I checked his CV, and it was him. So, I blocked his hire and had them rescind his $100,000 a year offer. It would have been amazing to see the look on that boss's face, knowing that I was the one who put a stop to his cushy 6-figure job. Below are my opinions on each of the stories. Story 1, roommate thought she was sneaky, ended up owing me $400 and got suspended. This story is a textbook example of sweet, calculated revenge. Your roommate's audacity to steal your meal card funds to treat herself and her friends, especially buying alcohol underage, was beyond brazen. Letting her rack up charges for 2 weeks while gathering evidence was a genius move, and the timing of deactivating your card right before her failed purchase? Perfection. The fact that campus security caught her red-handed with your ID info and a bottle of vodka in her closet sealed her fate. Getting your $400 back and her suspension from dorm life feels like the perfect payoff. I love how her own parents were mortified. Talk about karma. This story's a reminder not to mess with someone who's paying attention. Story 2, fire me before I quit. I ruin your life. Oh man, this one's a roller coaster of justice. Betty sounds like an absolute nightmare boss, blackmailing her way to a promotion, making racist remarks, and sabotaging good employees like you. Those clock-in slips you collected and Andy's vlogger recordings were pure gold for building your case. Exposing her hour-stealing, embezzlement, and health code violations to shut down the store was a masterstroke. The fact that her cheating and extortion led to her divorce and living in her car? Chef's kiss. Your restraint in not confronting her directly but letting the evidence do the talking is inspiring. I'm curious if it was Panera too. Either way, Betty got what she deserved in this epic takedown. Story 3, height approved. This story is peak malicious compliance. The Peters' racist outburst at your family was vile, and their smugness over the garage height complaint makes your dad's revenge so satisfying. Building a 2-story garage at exactly 23 feet 11 inches to meet the bylaw limit, then spray painting height approved in neon orange for them to stare at for 3 years. That's legendary! Blocking their sunlight was the perfect jab after their hateful behavior. Your dad's cool-headed planning turned their pettiness into a daily reminder of their loss. This story's a brilliant lesson in using the rules to deliver a stinging legal comeback. Story 4, I need that elevator now. This one had me laughing out loud. That entitled Karen demanding to use the elevator during your repair work despite her single grocery bag and perfectly functional legs is infuriating. Trapping her in the elevator with your emergency key and letting her stew in the dark for half an hour was a masterclass in petty revenge. The daughter whispering, "Don't hurry, make her suffer," is the cherry on top. Even her own kid was fed up. Your clarification about safety reassures me you had it under control, but the image of her shaking and taking the stairs afterward is pure gold. This story is a perfect reminder that ignoring warnings can leave you stuck, literally. Story 5, enjoy losing 2 jobs. Nabi sounds like a toxic nightmare of a boss. Firing people on vacation, blacklisting employees for personal grudges, and making racist hiring demands is beyond unacceptable. Your quiet work building a business conduct case while enduring his abuse shows incredible patience. Getting him sacked for his actions and then blocking his 6-figure job offer 2 years later? That's a power move. The thought of him losing that cushy $100,000 gig because of you is so satisfying. This story is a testament to the long game of revenge, keeping your cool and striking when it counts. I'd love to have seen his face when he got the rejection. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of another ProRevenge episode. If you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future revenge stories. See you in the next one.